What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another Hogwarts Legacy video. Today we're gonna take a look at even more details from the recent gameplay showcase that you likely missed. I believe that what we've seen so far is just the tip of the iceberg, but there's lots more secrets from the presentation that we should really go over. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure you leave a like on it and let's begin. Now, at one point in the gameplay, they showed this screen with all of the unlocked spells, which they unfortunately thought they could blur out. But I went through each and every single one of them and tried my best to match with all of the spell icons that we've seen up until this point. And this, I believe, to be a pretty close representation of what we'll also see in the final release. So we have Leviosa at the top that lifts enemies, as well as the Resto that slows down momentum. There's also the 3 purple spells, including Accio that pulls things and enemies to you, the Sando that slams things into the ground, and also the Pulso that throws things and enemies back. The red offensive skill category is also here, including Confrigo, the explosion spell, Expelliarmus, which basically disarms other enemies, and I believe the 4th one is Defendo. This one does the air slashes that we see in various gameplay scenes as well. For the light blue category, the only one we have is Lumino, but I don't think we've seen any of the others up until this point. We did have the unforgivable curses, however, including Imperius, which basically mind controls targets and makes them your allies in combat. Cruciatus, which looks like a longer stun effect that may or may not deal with some kind of debuff or damage over time, and we do know that we get a chance to learn this very early in the story from another student, depending on our choices. And of course, the most OP of them all, Avada Kedavra, or basically the Killing Curse. The remaining 2 rows are mostly there for utility, so the lighter green row at the top deals with the spells that you get in the Room of Requirement when you want to edit decorations. So the first one is used to modify and or customize items, the second one lets you move them around, and the cloud icon is for deleting/scrapping them. The final row is made out of icons that you'll get to see in the Vivarium when interacting with your pets. So this includes the feeding, cleaning, and probably the capture icon, though for the last one, I'm not really sure. The open world, on the other hand, is even more shocking, and I was blown away by the sheer number of different gameplay options upon a closer look at the minimap. One of these are in the form of the question mark icons that we see, and of course in the interview, the devs mentioned that there's lots of secrets to discover in the open world, some that might come in the form of puzzles we have to solve, character upgrades, other wizards to meet, and even other missions. And I think that these icons are supposed to represent these kinds of encounters that we have not fully discovered yet, because they seem to pop up in a lot of unrelated areas. Maybe as a way for the game to let us know that there is something to discover over there, maybe some kind of new content, but we won't know exactly what it is until we get closer. Like for example, in this scene with the player close to the bar, we can see the same effect that we saw in the previous gameplay reveal that requires you to use Revelio to get a field guide page. So that seems to coincide with the question mark over there, though I will say that in the previous gameplay reveal that was not marked on the minimap. So maybe they did add that between these different iterations, but I am also expecting that it's not the only thing that these question marks might hold. Maybe some other kind of content too, but again, your theories are welcomed in the comments down below. There's other open world activities that we've seen. Some of these include what appears to be caves or dungeons, as we do know that Hogwarts Legacy will feature a lot of hidden areas to find and explore. Another one is what I believe to be a ruin. This one shows a particularly abandoned cemetery that spawns enemies just as the player gets closer to the ground. So who knows, maybe we might fight some skeletons or maybe some ghosts. You might have also seen these paw icons. These are basically beast dens, and we'll get to rescue creatures in these areas that are hunted by poachers that we can then bring back at the Vivarium, and we can also have them as pets. But we did find out that various beasts will also unlock from doing quests, so that's not the only way to find them in. There's way too many to include, of course, even like the skull indicator that spawns in some of these random camps. We've only seen one in the reveal, but this makes me think that there might be some fighting with other humans, possibly other dark wizards, or maybe even some higher threats like bandits, because we do know from a tooltip pop-up later in the video that it does mention bandit camps exist and they are useful to collect resources needed to craft and mod our gear. In any case, the open world looks quite alive, though I think the showcase could have stuck a bit closer to the ground to better reflect that. There's lots of roaming characters on the roads or working the fields that we can make up in some of these shots, but even more so a lot of enemies. The traits page they showed is already a great indicator to give us a general idea of how many enemies there are in the game, and it seems that there's at least a handful of them, because we've seen creatures like dogbugs and spiders, also humanoids like dark wizards, goblins, and even trolls. But there's also an entry for a lupus protection trait, which makes me think of werewolves. Maybe they might add these kinds of enemies in the game too. That's or a more probable protection against mongrels. During this flight scene, we can see a pack of wolves spawning below the player and the challenge that requires you to interrupt mongrels, specifically referring to them, so it might be just protection against mongrels. And what seems awesome about these is that enemy encounters also feature different challenges that you can complete, called Dueling Feats. I noticed that a lot of these Dueling Feats spawned depending on the type of zone and the enemy spawning, so they seem to be rather contextual. Of course, we do know from previous gameplay showcases that combat challenges will be registered and be part of the Wizard's Field Guide, so much so that they will provide extra rewards, including extra XP, so you can also level up from them. Some of them are more complex than others, like the ones from the Battle Arena might contain multiple entries rather than just one, like how it is for most of the open world ones. In any case, smaller human settlements also appear quite abundant in the open world, and there's at least two more that I noticed close to the castle. The first one is very close to the lake right after the player starts flying, and already seems to include what I believe to be some kind of minigame puzzle, quests, and also different shopkeepers. So it might be worth paying attention to these areas. You can of course also unlock them as fast travel points from the looks of it, and some of these vendors might provide different items that you can't find in other places. Combat wise, we do have a few more reveals to us, including the tool menu that we can access using the L1 button, so we do know what that is for now. It doesn't look like we're going to unlock all of its slots right from the start, with a few options for the potions appearing locked at first. Here is where we get to pick combat plants onto the left side, which are also useful at providing extra help in combat. We saw the venomous tentaculi and how it behaves in combat, pretty much like a turret that shoots acid at nearby enemies. But there's also the Chinese chomping cabbage that will bite at its enemies, and I believe at some point we also saw a combat challenge relating to it specifically. Once the plant or potion is selected, we can of course see the selection over the L1 icon, including the number of charges left, and in case of the potions, the cooldown animation as it's being used. Good to note here is that plant seeds can be brought from the dogweed and deathcap vendor, I believe back at the main village, and must be grown in pots of different sizes in the room of requirement if you want them. This brings us to, of course, the room of requirement and a few things that we also missed. Well, the vivarium that we saw in the middle isn't the only one that you can customize and bring pets into. Rather, there's at least two more with different themes and aesthetics. They are visible in this shot, as we can see the lush one in the middle, but there's also a dark, likely swamp area onto the top left section that was also confirmed by the developers, and what appears to be a glowing moon effect to the right side, which might be a completely different one. And you can bring creatures in these ones too, as well as further customize them with your own aesthetics, and who knows, maybe provide some additional access to new things as well. Now, good to note is that the objects or conjurations that you can decorate these areas with do have a limit, which you can see under the budget meter when in the build menu. This seems to be separate between each area, so it should provide plenty of customization potential to decorate the room however you want to. All of the items require moonstone crystals to create, which by the way had their icons changed in between the previous gameplays. but it seems we can farm some of these right inside the Vivarium, with a few deposits being shown at one point in the scene. Also good to note is that deleting decorations inside this place will also refund at least a portion of the moonstones back to you, so you don't constantly delete them. Anyway, one final thing I want to quickly cover is that some of the stuff we missed in the gear and upgrade system seems pretty awesome. All gear will feature one defensive and offensive stat by default, and if you simply upgrade that piece of gear, this will also boost that stat up. So you're going to have to make a choice if you want to go with different items or not. But there's also other magical materials that can be used at the loom station to further add and upgrade secondary stats. Unfortunately, there's no footage of those, but I'm fully expecting stuff like maybe crit rating, cooldown reduction, or who knows, maybe some other kind of boons that synergize with our builds. And of course, there's also the trades that we already talked about before. I made one mistake in the previous video though, and yeah, the gear isn't identified at the loom, but rather at the identification station right around here. And this is also, by the way, one of the first that we get to unlock back at the Room of Requirement, and I just wanted to let you guys know of that. In any case, there's probably a lot more that I missed, so if you found any other secrets that nobody saw, yeah, totally let me know down below in the comments. In the meantime, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.